At least 3 Russian officers were killed following a powerful explosion that occurred at one of the Russian army commands in Melitopol, a city occupied by Russia. Ukrainian military intelligence, known as HUR, reported on November 12th. HUR described the explosion as a retaliatory action carried out on November 1st by representatives of the local resistance movement. The place where the explosion occurred was formerly the headquarters of a private Ukrainian postal company, New Post. Intelligence said further investigations were ongoing to determine whether there were more victims in addition to the 3 Russian National Guard officers. According to HUR, the attack occurred during a meeting of members of the Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, and the Russian National Guard. So far, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the FSB Security Service, and the Russian National Guard have not publicly reacted to the reported attack. Zaporizhia Oblast, and on 2 fronts, in the eastern Donetsk Oblast. Although progress has been slow in the costly operation launched in June, Ukraine continues to actively strike military targets in Russian-occupied territories. Ivan Fedorov, the exiled mayor of Melitopol, reported that his sources had informed him of a loud explosion in the occupied city that occurred around 7 p.m. on November 11th. Even though the events On November 11th, Russian forces continued their offensive operations along the Kupiansk-Swatow-Kreminna line. Despite this, there has been no significant progress, either confirmed or alleged. According to the information provided by the Ukrainian General Staff, the Russians tried unsuccessfully to attack several locations northeast of Petropavlovka, 7 kilometers east of Kupiansk near Sinkivka, 8 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, Ivanivka, 20 kilometers southeast of Kupianska, and Stelmachivki, 15 kilometers northwest of Swatovo. Swatov, Nowodzehorivki, 16 kilometers southwest of Swatove, Nevsky, 18 kilometers northwest of Kreminna, and in the Serebryanska forest area. The spokesman of the Ukrainian ground forces, Lieutenant Colonel Volodymyr Fityo, noted that Russia's main goal in the Kupiansk-Lyman area is to capture the city of Kupiansk. Attacks also took place towards Lyman, near Nadia, 15 kilometers southwest of. On the same day, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that their forces had repelled Ukrainian attacks near Sinkivka and Zahorikovka, 15 kilometers east of Kupiansk in the Kharkiv Oblast, as well as Dibrova, 7 kilometers southwest of Kreminaya, and Kharkivka, 20 kilometers southwest of Kreminna, Luhansk Oblast. On November 11th, Ukrainian forces continued counteroffensive operations in the western part of the Zaporizhia Oblast and were reported to have made progress. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces attacked northwest of the town of Verbov, 10 kilometers east of Robotyne, and near Novopokrovka, 13 kilometers northeast of Robotyne, which forced Russian troops to withdraw from tactical heights in Verbov and along the road Novopokrovka-Polohy. On the other hand, Russian sources reported that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Robotyne and Kopany, 5 kilometers northwest of Robotyne. However, the Institute for War Studies, ISW, observed no visual evidence of Russian withdrawal from the area. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that their forces continued counteroffensive operations towards Melitopol, also in the western part of the Zaporizhia Oblast. On the same day, Russian forces continued their offensive operations in the western Zaporizhia Oblast, but without confirmed progress. Robotyne. One Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces attacked west of Robotyne but failed to advance significantly. Another mill blogger stated that Russian forces made slight advances northwest of Verbov and captured several Ukrainian prisoners of war in the area. The Ukrainian General Staff reported unsuccessful Russian attacks near. As a result of Russian shelling in Kherson on the morning of November 12th, a 64-year-old man was killed and a 64-year-old woman was injured. Roman Marochko, a representative of the city's military administration, announced on the same day. The man suffered injuries in his yard and, as Marochko said, he later died in hospital. The woman was at home at the time of the attack and was hospitalized. Marochko explained that the attack took place in the Dnieper-Hersonia district, located on the Dnieper River, an area particularly vulnerable to Russian shelling. 1 year after Ukraine's liberation of Kherson on November 1, 2022, Russian forces stationed on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River continue to shell this southern city with intense fire, posing a serious threat to the approximately 70,000 civilians remaining there. Over the past 24 hours, Russian forces carried out 62 attacks on the Kherson Oblast, resulting in 1 death and 5 civilian injuries, as Governor Oleksandr Prokudin reported earlier on the morning of November 12th. Russian and Ukrainian sources reported that on November 11th, Ukrainian forces carried out an attack on Russian positions in the rear of the Zaporizhia Oblast. Russian military bloggers claimed that Russian air defenses shot down 2 Storm Shadow missiles near Berdyansk. The mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, said that residents of Melitopol and Berdyansk reported hearing loud explosions, which were most likely the result of the activation of the air defense system. Russian forces have intensified their operations near occupied Bakhmut in the Donetsk Oblast in an attempt to take control of nearby areas, Oleksandr Syrsky, commander of the Ukrainian ground forces, said on November 12th. The Ukrainian armed forces are successfully repelling Russian attacks in this area, as Colonel General Syrsky emphasized in his message on Telegram. In another entry, Syrsky talked about his visit to the troops fighting in the Bakhmut and Lyman areas, analyzing ways to increase the effectiveness of the combat deployment of our troops and plan further actions. According to a November 1st morning report of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russian forces tried unsuccessfully to take positions near Klishchivka and Andriivka south of Bakhmut, as well as near Robotyne in the Zaporizhia Oblast. Andriivka and Klishchivka were liberated in early September after a series of small daily attacks that made significant gains south of Bakhmut. This operation, although expensive, was carefully planned and began in early summer. The spokesman of the Ukrainian ground forces, Volodymyr Fityo, pointed out on November 12th that weather could affect land warfare, limiting the ability to move military equipment. If it starts raining now, the use of combat aircraft and drones will be limited, making it difficult to move equipment. However, artillery will continue to be used as before, Fityo said, quoted by the ZNDUA news website. Fityo also added that disrupting Russian supply lines and eliminating forward positions are key goals of the Ukrainian army. On November 12th, the Northern Command reported that in the last 24 hours, Russian forces had shelled the northern Chernihiv and Sumy Oblasts 13 times from the border. The Ukrainian military reports that Russian forces shelled these areas using 120mm mortars, multiple rocket launchers, and explosives dropped from drones. More than 80 explosions were reported in the communes of Semenivka, Snovsk, and Novgorod-Siersky in the Chernihiv Oblast, as well as in the communes of Shostka, Seredina Buda, and Nowa Huta in the Sumy Oblast. Fortunately, no casualties were reported from these attacks. However, the Regional Prosecutor's Office of the Sumy region reported that on November 1st, 2 civilians were killed as a result of a Russian attack on the road between Nowa Huta and Stara Huta. The Chernigov and Sumy Oblasts, located on Ukraine's northern border with Russia, were attacked and partially occupied by Russia during its invasion in February 2022. However, Russian forces withdrew from these regions in April of the same year after the Kremlin's failed attempt to seize Kiev. The Russian authorities are intensifying efforts to replenish the labor force and change the demographics in occupied Ukraine. On November 11th, the mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, announced that the Russian authorities were bringing people from Russia and Central Asia to the occupied Zaporizhia Oblast. This is part of the Zaporozhye Virgin Lands program aimed at destroying Ukrainian identity and compensating for labor shortages. On October 20th, the Russian state news website RIA Novosti reported that the occupying governor of Zaporizhia, Yevgeny Balitsky, had developed this program as part of a 10-year development plan. This program provides people moving to occupied Ukraine with Russian citizenship and various government benefits. On November 10th, the Ukrainian Resistance Center stated that the Russian authorities were massively bringing migrants from Central Asia to the occupied Donetsk region, where they were to work mainly in construction companies with inhumane working conditions. Meanwhile, Russian officials and federal entities continue to establish ties and patronage networks with occupied Ukraine. On November 10th, Russian Deputy Prime Minister Marat Kusnulin visited occupied Lysychansk and Severodonetsk in the Luhansk Oblast to assess winter preparations. On November 11th, Senator of the occupation, Kherson Andrei Alexienko, announced that the Russian Republic of Mordovia is supervising 27 infrastructure projects in the occupied Kalinchak district of Kherson Oblast. These investments, amounting to almost 27 million rubles, approximately $292,900, are intended to support preparations for winter.